Hello and welcome to this episode of the VAS training on how does light therapy work so that you actually know what machine is going to produce the best results, which is one of the questions that everybody always has, right? Which one's the best and how do I even know? Because there's so much confusion information out there. So I'm not going to do any comparisons or talk about my machine or other machines. I'm just going to talk about in general how light therapy works so that with that information, you can now make an educated analysis to figure out which machine is going to work best. So without further ado, let's actually get started. And so how does light therapy work? What's actually going on with it, right? So how light therapy works is that every cell in your body has a receptor site on that cell. Right? Now, sometimes those receptor sites are for hormones, for chemicals, for food, for, radio frequency signals, for, whatever. But the cells have all these little receptor sites. And when something activates that receptor site, think of a lock and a key. When you put a key into a lock and you turn it, that key is activating that lock. And now the door opens. Well, that receptor site on the cell, when something attaches to that receptor site and causes that change, there's an actual conformational change in the receptor site. And what happens is the cell wall does something different, or the cell does something different, or something changes designed on what it's for. Right? So what happens is that what we found is that light itself actually stimulates different receptor sites on the cell walls. Right now, different colored light stimulate different type of receptor cells. You need different amounts of energy to stimulate different types of receptor cells, right? Just like any chemical or any other thing in the body would, the light can actually create changes within the cells from the energy of the light itself. Right. So different lights, different receptors, different power, amounts, just like if you have a little bit of chemical, it's not going to do much change. If you have a lot of chemical, it'll do more change. It's the same thing with the light. Right? So that's in essence what's actually happening on a cellular level. Now, what determines that cellular conformational change is joules at a specific wavelength or nanometer or color. They're all the same things, right? So wavelength, nanometer, colors, right? Those are all words used to describe the actual, like if you're looking at the visible spectrum, what color the light actually looks like, right? So 660 is red, 635 is red, 535 is green, right? Ultraviolet is below, I don't even know, but I think 300. Infrared is above 680. So usually doing with, 840, 880 is where most of the research at. So that number, that 3-digit number between, usually 300 and 1,000 is the wavelength, nanometer, color. And that will determine what happens in the body, which of those receptor sites actually get stimulated. Now, I'm going to come back to joules here in a moment, right? But I want to talk about the pulsation or frequency, right? Now, what I've read so many studies out there. I've bought so many books and, bought so many studies, just to read them to see what's actually happening with light therapy. And what I found is that the pulsation or the frequency, or think about turning a light switch off and on real quick, right? Is that if you turn the light switch off and on real quick, what'll happen is that it'll still be light in the room, but it won't be as light, right? Now, what happens is that in all the studies I've seen, there isn't any sort of pulsation or frequency, two different words, right, measured in hertz, that really makes it much different as far as the results. So everything that I've seen has to do with either the color or the joules, the energy, right? Now, the reason why some studies will seem to show on the surface that the pulsation or frequency is making a difference is because what happens is when you pulsate the LED lights, you can actually power them with more power to get the same, to get a same effect. So there's more power behind them because they're not on the entire time. And so it allows them to run cooler, less heat, and now they have more power to them. And all the studies I've seen that actually show some pulsation or frequency effect, you can actually attribute it back to calculating out the joules and seeing that, the joules were actually higher because of the pulsation, and that's why it made a difference. Now, back to that first one, milliwatts per centimeter squared times time. That's what a joule is. That's a definition. Milliwatt means the amount of power, right? And it's always measured as a standard scientific, at least I shouldn't say always, but almost always. It's always measured as a standard scientific of squared centimeters. So power per square centimeter in the body times time equals joules, right? So let me give you some examples of that. Now, this joule is what ultimately in every study I ever read accounts for the results or the results their lack of. right? So joules is what makes the results in almost every study I've ever seen. It's not so much the milliwatts. It's not so much the time. It's not so much the frequency, right? What is it mostly is it's the time times the area over, the power times the area over time, the joules. That's what's making the difference. And that is a very consistent number. And that's why when you read all these studies, you go, well, this one has this power and this one has this time. But when you dissect it and you look at it, you'll find out that most of these studies, most of these results are actually powered or actually have similar joules power creating those results. Okay? So what that means is that if you want milliwatts per centimeter squared, knowing the milliwatts isn't enough to actually see what kind of joules you're getting, right? So for example, if you just knew that something was 130 milliwatts, that wouldn't tell you how many joules were being produced, because is it 130 milliwatts over a square centimeter, over 10 square centimeters, over 50 square centimeters, right? So that's why in order to calculate joules, you have to know how much power and the area that power is being distributed over, right? And again, the scientific standard is centimeter squared, right? So milliwatts per centimeter squared is what you need to know to actually calculate joules. Now, milliwatts per centimeter squared times time equals joules. Now, here's the funniest part, right? Most studies, most people, most things, they actually only quote milliwatts, and you have to dig in the study to find out the area, the square centimeters of the area treated. Right? Now, most studies will tell you how much time they did it. So what you do is you just simply take, okay, here's how many milliwatts they used over this amount of square centimeters of area that they treated times the 60-second time, and that's how many joules per minute that you get. Right? Now, joules per minute is not the total joules. So now if you, let's say that you use the machine for 3 minutes, so now you're going to have more joules delivered to that same area. And what it is it's not about time, it's not about any of those individually, it's about total joules at which nanometer, at which wavelength, right? That's what's going to determine the results, right? So here's an example. Let's say that a machine is producing 70 milliwatts per centimeter squared of power. Well, if we convert the milliwatts to watts, it's 0.07 watts, because remember, power is watts, right? Times area times time, right? So we got 0.07 watts of power per centimeter squared, right? Times 60 seconds equals that that machine, that device is delivering 4.2 joules per minute, right? So 4.2 joules per minute is what's being delivered. So if you need to get a dose of 16 joules to produce the desired effect, what you have to do is you have to then do 4 minutes, right? If you need, 32 joules to get the desired effect in the body, well, what do you have to do? Well, 32 divided by 4 is, I don't even know, 8, right? You have to do 8 minutes to get the desired results. And that's how light therapy works. That's the science behind a light therapy. And like I said, what you'll find is that everybody who knows what they're talking about, Michael Hamblin is kind of the researcher. If you watch any of his videos, if you look at all the stuff, what you'll find is that the general consensus out there is that it's not about a certain milliwatt. It's not about a certain frequency. It's not about a certain time. What it's about is how many joules did we get in the body at what wavelength, and that determines the results. Right? So that's the key. That's the key in understanding what's actually going to produce results for patients. Now, that being said, right, since time is pretty much standard, 60 seconds, right? You don't have to worry so much about that, and you can do longer or shorter if you need. Really, the only two things that you have to worry about to figure out what is going to be the most effective machine is the color or wavelength that it's being produced at and the milliwatts per centimeter squared. Right? Those two things are what determine joules, which in essence will determine the effectiveness of the machine. Now, if you have lower power, you can just simply treat for longer and get the exact same result as another machine that has higher power that's treating for less, right? Because it just matters how many joules the body is getting. Now, I know a lot of people are thinking this, oh, well, if some joules are better, more joules is even way better, right? Because that's the American mentality. And if maybe it's even the, predicament of being human. But what happens is that Michael Hamblin and all the studies and research out there kind of corroborate this, is that there's a bell curve. And I'll talk about that bell curve in a minute, but more is not always better. It's always a sweet spot. How many joules is it going to take to produce the result we're looking for? You do too little, you're not going to get as a result. And you do too much, you're not going to get as good a result. Right? Now, frequency for the most part, right, is usually set, or the wavelength. This should be, I should actually change that. Sorry, but the wavelength is actually usually set. So, for example, here is a picture of a graph, right, and the different wavelength of the actual light. So, when somebody advertises, my machine is 532, it's never just 532. You'll see, like in this example, right, or this one here, what they say is it actually shows that most of it, that's 531, 531 and a half, and 532, there's almost nothing. Right now, the only reason I point this out is because these spreads can be big or small, right? The more precise the equipment, the better. The better the LEDs are, the better the laser is, right? The smaller that wavelength is going to be. Now, sometimes that smaller wavelength is good, and sometimes it's bad. It depends on what you're trying to do in the body. For example, 635 light versus 660 light, they do similar things in the body, but they also do different things in the body. Right? So, for example, 660 will help actually stimulate stem cells in the body versus 635. There's no real research or studies that show that it actually stimulates stem cells. Now, when most people produce a 635 LED light machine, there's usually some 660 coming out because the spread on LED is usually bigger than laser, but it's a lower intensity. It's not as much power, right? So that's what the wavelength looks like. Now, the better the light, the narrower the spread, but it's not necessarily the better for the results because, again, what are we trying to do in the patient? There's different studies that show different wavelengths create different outcomes in the body at different joules. And so we can actually use that to start targeting and get more things that we want to actually have happen. Now, what this means, and I kind of said this earlier, but I wanted to put a slide in here to make sure, is that the higher the milliwatts per centimeter squared, because time is always time, can't change time, right? The higher the milliwatts per centimeter squared, what that means is the shorter the time it takes to get to the exact same amount of joules, right? So if you have higher power, you can get to the same joules in less time. That's what that means. And that's what a lot of people are looking for, is how can I help more patients, right, in less time? Now, if you're trying to compare the equipment, the problem is that not every manufacturer talks about joules of the machine, because most of them don't even know that joules exist. Like if you ask them what's a joule, they'd be like, I don't know. Right? And they wouldn't know. Now, eventually everyone will learn, because if enough people ask them, they're going to learn it. But my point is that, I'm find another video from any manufacturer out there talking about this. There isn't. Why? Because I've been doing this longer than everybody else in the United States. And I actually did the science and research to figure it out, rather than just make something and go, hey, I hope it's okay. Right? Now, if you don't know the milliwatts per centimeter squared and your manufacturer doesn't know them, you can actually buy a $250 light meter online at Amazon or other places that will measure the milliwatts per centimeter squared of light. Now, some people out there say, oh, you can't effectively measure the power of light when there's two different frequencies. Yeah, you can. You just have to buy a better meter. Right? Light is not some magical thing that if you get two different kinds of light that changes the power or the ability to measure it. All it means is you just need a different meter that measures both sets of wavelengths, right? Because at different wavelengths, the meters have to know what wavelength is coming in so that they can tell you how much power is coming out, right? Because different wavelengths produce different results in the body the same way they do in a meter. Now, if you want a link to buy one of these, send me an email, and I'll happily send you a link directly to it. You can buy one of your own and go measure all the different machines and equipment you want, right? So now, if you don't want to go buy that meter, and the other manufacturers don't say what their milliwatts per centimeter squared, what you can do is you can actually kind of roughly calculate it, right? So what you do is you divide the total power of their machine, and most manufacturers know that. You divide that total power by the surface area treated, so how big is their treatment area, right? Divide that by the inverse square law, right, times efficiency. Now, what does the inverse square law mean? The inverse square law of LED light says that when something is an inch away from the LED source, it's about half the power. When it's 2 inches away from the LED source, it's a eighth of the power. When it is 3 inches away from the LED source, it is 1/64th the power, right? So it's an exponential curve of diminishing power the further away you get from an LED source. And that's why when you're doing treatments, you have to make sure that with LED light, you are as close to that treatment area as possible, or you have the power turned up so high that by the time it gets to the patient, right, that we're still delivering the effective amount that we need to produce the joules we need to get the results we want. Right now, because that's confusing for a lot of people, I'm sure, right? Unless you're good at math, like I was in high school, right? I slept through math class and still got A's, right? So here's an example. So let's say somebody says their total power of the machine is 50,000 milliwatts, right? And they treat 1,500 square centimeters, right? So you just simply divide the total power by the treatment area, and you end up with a really simple number, right? So 50,000 divided by 1,500 square centimeters is 33 milliwatts per centimeter squared. Right now, you take that 33, and this is not an exact science, right? The best way to do this is by the meter, measure the milliwatts per centimeter squared, and then you just simply times that times time, and get joules. It's really simple. But short of doing that, short of the manufacturers actually doing that themselves, right? Here's how you calculate it, right? So you got 33 milliwatts a centimeter squared because you took 50,000 divided by 1,500. You divide it by the distance. So if it's like some people put it on the skin, some people do it at a distance. If it's at a distance, you then have to divide by the distance, and it's not an exact because the inverse square law is actually exponentially less, but right. And you multiply that, and that's basically what you're doing is kind of times the efficiency, and you end up with, this machine that says, oh, I got 50,000 milliwatts per centimeter squared equals 2 milliwatts per centimeter squared of actual power per square centimeter. All right. Now you multiply that by the efficiency because LEDs are never 100% efficient, right? What happens like with any light bulb is when you turn on the light bulb, you put out light, and what also happens is the light bulb gets hot, right? And so that heat means that with the power that was put in is not coming out as light. And that's essentially what the efficiency is, right? So depending on those different numbers, and you're going to guess, now I use 50% efficiency because most LEDs are 50 to 75% efficient, but most people use cheap ones from China that are 50% efficient versus, ones manufactured here in the United States. You're going to get better quality metals, which means it's going to conduct the electricity better. It's not going to create as much resistance, and it's not going to create as much heat. Now, if you didn't understand that, don't worry. The average efficiency of most LEDs is 50%. All right, so right? So this is the curve that I kind of alluded to earlier, right? And there's a scale of effectiveness, right? And there's a downside to this curve. So what that means is that as you go over time, right, which is going to the right, you're going to give more and more and more and more and more joules, and the effectiveness of the treatment is going to go up to a peak, and that's going to happen at a certain time. Right now, when I say time, I mean joules. So when you deliver this many joules, boom, that's when you're going to be the most effective. That's how effective you can get, is right there. And let's say, that number is going to be different for everything you're treating. So if you're treating, fat loss versus pain versus, skin wrinkles versus, different things, you have a different amount of joules that is that peak. And it's really simple to find. You just look at the studies, which is what I've done, right? So now when you start treating beyond that time, right, what's going to happen is when you start delivering more joules than the peak amount of effectiveness, it actually starts decreasing the results again. And that's why it's so crucial that you have the right amount of joules, right? It's not the right amount of time on a clock. It's not the right amount of milliwatts of a machine. It's not anything. It's the color, right? Times the joules, not times it, the color and the joules. That's what gives you the effectiveness. Now, if you'll notice here, there's a point where the scale is going up exponentially, and then the scale, and let me see if I can show you with the little pointer here, right? There's right here, see how the scale's going up here, right? And then what happens is it starts to round off before it actually gets to the peak. Now, what happens is, if you notice, that's like third of the time to get that little extra 2 or 3%. And so the way I've designed my system, the way I've designed my machines is, where is my machine cut off on time? It cuts off right there, right? Right where we get the maximum amount of effect for the least amount of time, the 80-20 principle, boom, my machine shuts off. And that's why when people double the time, oh, if I double the time, I'll get even better results, right? And everyone tries it because everyone thinks that, and everyone finds out that, oh, when I double the time, no, I still get mostly the same results. Now, if you really wanted to get a little bit better results, you'd add about 30% more time to the machine, and then you'd get a little better results. But for the extra 30% time, you don't get an extra 30% results. It's like 3% results. So how does Vivaz Contour actually work?
Safely penetrates the patient's skin. Vivaz targets the adipocytes or fat cells by the specific frequency, wavelength, and power settings of Vivaz. The fat cells absorb the electromagnetic energy from VVAS. When enough energy is absorbed by the fat cells, transitory pores begin to form on the surface. Water, glycerol, and free fatty acids begin to leak out of the pores into the interstitial space or sewer system between fat cells. The adipocytes release these substances into circulation, and they are processed naturally in the body. The fat cells are then smaller, leaving you with inch loss, fat loss, and a reduction in the appearance of cellulite.
Now, I love this video. I actually made that video 10 years ago now, and it's so funny because I see so many of my competitors ending up with this on their website or this on their clients' websites, and it's my video. I had it made, right? So anyway, that's how VVAS actually works. All right. This is the new VVAS surface where all the paddles are already on a blanket type surface strap. So it's really simple to use. All you do is you take the strap, which already has all the paddles on it. You can put 4. There's bigger straps. You can put up to 8 on them. You can put 2 on them. You can customize your straps, whatever size you want them to be. And to treat the patient, all you do, lay them across the belly, right? Hit start. And if you want, there's more paddles, more surface area, right? So what you can do, you can also lay them across legs. You can lay them across arms, right? You can kind of wrap them around a little bit. So like if you want to do this with your arm, you can hold up your arm straight in the air. Okay? Wrap it around, and you say lay your leg, put your arm back down the table, and wrap around the whole arm. Simple, easy, right? Hit start, walk out of the room, come back in when the patient's done, lift up your arm for me. Good, right? Put this back on the strap holder, and then this one back in. And then you're going to have up to 16 paddles strapped onto these different straps. There's 3 different sizes, and so you can customize them for however you want. And that's how easy the treatments actually are. All right. So now, what are some of the things that VVAS can help? Now, again, some of these are off-label use. They don't have FDA clearances for all of them, but just looking at the studies, looking at the Joules, right? Looking at the wavelength, right? There's studies that show that all of this different stuff can specifically be helped by VVAS. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about here is that most of the studies that you see or that are quoted or talked about on red light treatment is actually on 660. Right? The reason why so many people use 635 is because it's a cheaper LED, right? And you don't have to believe me on that. Simply go on eBay and search 635 LED, see how much it costs. Go on eBay and search 660 LED, see how much it costs. You'll see that the 660 LED is almost twice the price, and that's why most everybody who's doing fat loss uses 635. But if you actually look at all the original research with red light, right? Anything beyond fat loss, because most of the companies, or I shouldn't say most, but some of the companies have done studies on their 635 and it still works for fat loss. But if you look at all the different stuff with stem cell production, with nitric oxide production, with ATP production, if you look at the different red light studies showing how it helps all these different things, what you'll see is almost all those studies are on 660, right? The actually knew the guy who actually started the red light studies with NASA back in the 90s. He's passed away now, right? But that is where it kind of all started, and he started it with 660, and that's what most people have done the studies on, and that's what has been proven to work. Now, 635 may work for all of these, but there's not any studies on them other than for fat loss. Now, what is the difference between laser versus LED? Right. So if you look here, what happens on the right is you'll see there's a wave, and what happens in a laser is all of those up and down waves are all coherent. That means every up and down wave of the laser is in the same up and down pattern. It's all one up and down pattern when you look at it. Now, LED light, those up and down patterns, they overlap. They're not all synced together, and that magical word is called non-coherent. Right. And so the only difference between LED light and laser light, if you design the diode the same, whether it's the LED diode or the laser diode, if you design it the same, the only difference is the LED diode has non-coherent light and the laser has coherent light. Now, there are some benefits and disadvantages to that. Right. The one benefit to the laser light being coherent is that it will go deeper in the body, right, before it becomes non-coherent light. Right. Now, the other big difference, right, is this next slide, which is what happens when you shine laser through a glass of water. And I kind of already gave it away, but what do you get is you get non-coherent light. Now, said another way, shining laser through fluid gets you LED light. Let me say that again. when you shine a laser through fluid, you get LED light. That is 100% scientifically, technically correct statement, because the only difference is coherent and non-coherent. When you shine a laser through water, it becomes non-coherent, which means LED light. Now, the question people always ask is, what percentage is the body of water? Right? Now, everybody argues a little bit, but it's a lot. Now, there's actual studies out there, and they're listed on my website, that show that laser light itself doesn't actually get used by the body. What has to happen is that the laser light has to be changed into non-coherent light before the body can actually utilize the energy. Now, the beauty of the body is it's mostly water, so laser almost always gets converted to non-coherent light. That's why laser still works. But the problem is, right, is that it actually has to convert it first, and laser is going to go deeper in the body because of the coherency before it gets scattered. So that means if you're trying to treat something on the surface, LED is actually better because it comes out scattered already. If you're trying to treat something, more than an inch or two down into the body, laser's better because it's going to go down and get there before most of it gets scattered. Right? So again, it's not that one is better than the other. It's what are you trying to do? Laser light, because of the coherency, is going to allow you to treat things deeper in the body than LED will, but LED is going to work better for stuff on the surface because it already comes out non-coherent. All right. So again, I just said this, but multiple studies show this, that the laser light actually has to be changed to LED light before it can actually be used in the body. Okay. Now, some actual pictures of fat cells under an electron microscope and what happens when you put light on them. There you go, right? The fat cells don't die. They're not killed. They don't get, whatever. But what happens is the fat cells actually open up, release the fat contents, the water, glycerol, and free fatty acids. The fat cells shrink and the people shrink. Now, the beauty of this, right, is that why this is so much better, because everyone thinks, oh, if you kill the fat cell, that's a good thing. Or if you kill the cells. No, it's not. Your body has the same number of fat cells you've had since puberty. They just get bigger and smaller. So if you kill some fat cells, say in your stomach, and you don't change your life, or your life goes back to the way it was and you gain fat again, now the fat cells in your elbows, knees, and arms are going to get bigger. And you're going to look even more silly than before you killed the fat cells in the first place. Right? Now, 7-minute treatment time of VAS. Why is my treatment time so low? Because, as you now know, because my milliwatts per centimeter squared is so high that when I multiply it by the time, I don't need as much time to get the same amount of joules delivered into the body. Right? So why is it that all these people are having all these difficulties, even though they're doing all these different things to lose fat? It's because your fat cells are not opening up, right? Your body is a lazy machine. And some people like to call it efficient. I like to call it lazy, right? Your body is very lazy / efficient. And so what happens when you contract your bicep muscle is your tricep muscle automatically relaxes. When you release insulin, which lowers your blood sugar level, glucagon, which raises it, shuts off, right? And when you release the hormones in your body to burn fat, the hormones that cause your body to store fat get shut down, and vice versa. And so what this means, what's wrong and why these machines work so well, is that when you're doing the 13 things in your life, and I'm not going to go into them now, I have another video training on that. When you go into the 13 things in your life that cause your fat cells to be in fat storage mode, no matter what you do, one or two, even if it's diet and exercise, those two things are not going to outweigh the 13 things that most Americans do. And so that's why they never lose fat. Versus what do these machines do? Right, is the light, when you get the proper amount of joules at the right frequency, stimulates the fat cells to open up. And now what happens is the body has to be in fat burning mode to release or to burn the fat that's just been released from those fat cells. And so despite those 13 things in our life, we can actually get the body to do it. Now, this is a question a lot of people ask, well, how come the beds don't work very well for weight loss, right? And the reason why is because if you don't get the right amount of joules per centimeter squared, you're not going to stimulate the fat cells to open up. And I didn't design my bed to stimulate fat cells to open up. I designed my bed to help with pain, inflammation, anti-aging, right? Sports performance, enhancement, healing, ATP energy, stem cell energy. That's what the bed was designed for, right? If you want to lose fat, you have to have a different amount of joules per centimeter squared to get the fat loss results. So people always ask, where does the fat go? Just a quick little thing. Here's the answer. It goes the same exact place as a healthy lifestyle does. Right. Again, I have 3 different FDA clearances. I got a patent, though I should pending to that. I have a patent pending as well. Anyway, it's multiple different ones. I've been around longer than everyone else in the industry, and that's why what you're hearing from me right now is something that nobody else talks about, because they don't even understand it themselves. Right? I have multiple different products, multiple different things. And like everything in my business, what we're doing with these products is not just treating a symptom, we're helping the patient be well. That's why my systems work so well. Is anyone can put a red light machine on somebody, but if you want to be a real doctor, you're going to look at their entire life, which I show you how to do, and we're going to help them be well in all areas so that it speeds up the results. So if we're doing weight loss, I have a whole system to speed up the weight loss results of the red light. If we're doing anti-aging, I have a whole system to speed up the results of the anti-aging. If we're doing neuropathy, I have a whole system to help the body heal from the neuropathy. And it's all designed around one thing: increasing their wellness. Right? Increasing their wellness. All right. So this is just one or two more slides about my systems and marketing, because they're really what make me different than everyone else. A lot of other people claim they have turnkey systems, but at the end of the day, you ask them for a money back guarantee. If you're going to make money, nobody gives it but me. Right. And I'm able to do that. I'm able to guarantee people who, make these kind of numbers you're seeing, because I give them everything, because I am a doctor myself. I did it in practice myself for 2 years, made $500,000, and I show everyone else how to do the same thing who buys my system. And I give you everything I use to do that as well. Right? I have money back guarantees. Now, a lot of people, they're getting so immune to money back guarantees, but I want you to think for a moment. Right? Actually do something weird. Think, right? I know we all have so much time in the day to just sit around and think, right? But so I'm pointing this out. I want you to think, if that somebody else doesn't offer a money back guarantee, right? What does that mean about what they're telling you? What does that mean about what they're saying? Is if they are saying stuff and you now buy, and you find out later that what they said was an exaggeration or was simply even a bold-faced lie, if you find out later after you buy, what happens? Nothing. There's no recourse. You keep the machine. Good luck. Right? I've been around longer than every other company in the United States. And I've had these guarantees ever since I first came around, 9 years ago, almost 10 years ago now. And the reason why I'm still in business longer than everyone else, because I've seen companies come and go. I've seen machines turn into paperweights when they break because the company no longer is around to service them, right? The reason I'm still around is because I do what I say and I say what I do. Right? And that's what my guarantees mean, is that I'm going to be telling you the truth. Everyone else is going to be exaggerating or blatantly lying just to make the sale. So if you want more information, if you want to chat with me, if you want to watch a webinar, if you want me to send you stuff in the mail, right, give me a call. That's my personal cell phone number, right? Go to my webinar, watch it. It's about not only the markets of whether or not you want to do these type of things, these LED therapies for patient wellness, but it also is about the products themselves and comparing them, right? I'm happy to tell you over the phone if you want. I'm happy to tell you in an email if you want. I'm not going to tell you in a text because there's way too much to text, but, right, get a hold of me, watch my webinars, find out more if you're interested. And hopefully one day I will see you at my 2-day training that sets me apart from everybody else, because I'm teaching you about the business and not just how to use a machine and hit start. So thanks for joining me, and hopefully we'll hear from you soon.